back to Subject to Interpretation. I'm your host, Maria Ceballos, and today we're continuing a conversation that we began in part 1 of our Safe AI series. If you haven't heard that episode, I highly recommend going back to listen. In part 1, Dr. Holly Silvestri reminded us that AI can never replace ethical judgment and cultural competence that human interpreters provide. She also warned that if interpreters don't engage now, we risk having AI tools imposed on us without regard for our expertise or working conditions. And as Sean Norris shared, we are at a critical moment where interpreters' voices can shape the future of AI in our field, or lose control to technology that doesn't fully understand our work. So this episode today is all about action, what we as interpreters can do with Safe AI guidance to ensure that our voices and our values lead the future. I'm joined today by two incredible leaders, Ludmila Golovine and Dr. Bill Rivers. Welcome, Ludmila, Mila, and welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So Dr. Bill Rivers, for everybody who doesn't know him yet, is a nationally recognized expert in language policy, advocacy, and multilingual education with over 35 years experience. He's a former executive director of JNCL Nicholas and principal of WP Rivers and Associates. He now serves on the Safe AI Taskforce, advocating for ethical, inclusive language use in emerging technologies. And Ludmila, who is no stranger to Subject to Interpretation, is president and CEO of MasterWord Services, a global leader in language solutions with over 30 years in the industry. She serves on the Safe AI Taskforce, bringing the interpreter's perspective to promote trauma-informed ethical AI integration in language services. Both guests are here to help us move from awareness to action. So with that said, it's time to let our guests tell us more about Safe AI and in particular, the Safe AI guidelines that were released last year. And these principles are not just abstract ideals, right? They're touchstones for decision making. And I see Bill shaking his head in agreements. So talk to us a little bit about this, Bill.
First of all, thank you, Maria, for inviting us. Safe AI was formed pretty much within a couple months after the launch of ChatGPT-3 and after a couple of language industry conferences where AI interpreting vendors or companies that said they were going to be AI interpreting vendors, because there really wasn't much at the time, in May of 2023, were predicting the imminent demise of human interpreting as a profession. And a number of us got together from the interpreting profession, from the language industry, from the client side, from the regulatory side, the academic researcher stakeholders, and said, well, let's get ahead of this and let's really focus on an honest examination of the affordances and pitfalls of AI in interpreting. We invited in sign language and deaf and hard of hearing folks to talk about their concerns, and we'll touch on that a bit, and I'm sure a little bit later. But after roughly a year of work and 3 major research studies, we published guidance, ethical guidance. They're guidance principles. It's not guidelines. We thought we'd be doing guidelines that would be like really specific, like thou shalt not, or thou should, or thou shouldn't. But what we realized, and what the guidance committee under the leadership of Sean Norris realized early on, is that we needed to create a higher level structure of key principles that could then be adapted to specific circumstances, specific audiences, specific verticals, specific situations. So we ended up with these 4 principles. I'm going to go through them very quickly. End user autonomy. And now, end user itself is a bit of a challenge because that's the term that's used in international standards and national standards for interpreting, like ASCM standard F2089 and the ISO standards like International Standardization Organization standard 18841. We say end user. Now, end user, to me, and the kind of the scales fell from my eyes during the process of developing the guidance. End user has no agency, and what we're really talking about are people who have the right to communicate with each other. They're not end users of interpreting, right? They are partners in a communication event. So, all right, but we're stuck with end users for the moment. I'm sorry for that digression, and if I digress too much, please stop me. I have a doctoral degree in Slavic linguistics, so why use one word when 10 words will do? But the first principle is end user autonomy, that the people involved in an interpreted communication have the right to determine how that interpretation will occur. They have the right to know which kind of interpreting is being offered. They have the right to accept it or decline it, and the right to insist on one or another method for providing interpreting. The second principle is improving safety and well-being for end users. Any use of AI must be at least as good as the human interpreted equivalent. And now we're going to end up talking, I think, a little bit later about all the different ways that AI is now being integrated into interpreting workflows. But the AI can't make things worse, basically. The third is transparency of the development of the technology as well as the adoption of AI interpreting. So that has sort of 2 pieces. One is, if the company is developing an AI interpreting solution, they have to be transparent about how it was developed, what the pluses and minuses are. And if a client, healthcare system, a state AOC, administrative office of the courts, and we can talk about that too. Please remember to ask me about that if I don't bring it up later. Whatever that entity is adopting AI, they have to be transparent about the fact that they're adopting it. And the final point is accountability. If something goes wrong, who's on the hook, right? Mila can comment on this, of course, as the CEO of a language services company. I, as a one-person practitioner in the strange arts of lobbying and consulting, I have both error and omission insurance and business liability insurance. Anybody in our space, any company in our space has E&O and business liability. Something goes wrong, who's paying for that, the consequences of that? And that's a really important point, and I keep hammering that with different audiences because, again, there's this, we're using AI all over the place for radiology and pathology. Well, we talk about that. It's still the medical doctor who's making the final diagnosis and the final treatment decisions and assuming the liability for those. And yet we're getting this sort of pressure from end users, clients, not the end users, not the people in the interpreted conversation, but the clients, to say, okay, well, why don't we use the AI? It's cheaper, and we're not responsible if something goes wrong, or maybe we are, right? So there's a lot of different threads there in that guidance. The guidance is available at safeaitf.org, safeaitf.org.
So I think this is a good time to bring Mila into the conversation, because you're mentioning this issue of liability, and I think and I believe that human oversight is part of the is part of the concerns that a lot of people have had. So Mila, in your role as a teacher and your role as a business person who oversees a very large language services provider, talk to us about, when you started to hear, the potential of AI, where you thought you could fit it into your business model and where you thought it should not be.
Well, I think AI is a great tool, and as any technology change, people are very uncomfortable with change, right? When cars first replaced horses, when airplanes came about, when computers came about, and every time there is a Windows or a Teams upgrade, I don't know if it's change makes us uncomfortable, but change eventually is something that also propels us forward. So AI has its place, and if we look at the numbers from CSA research, I think less than 0.5%, something 0.00038% of the information that is actually generated in the world on a daily basis is being translated or interpreted, which means that with AI, a lot more people can gain access to information. I now can look maybe at a website in Tamil or maybe at a website in French and understand very quickly what that website tells me. So AI will have a great place, and I do hope that it continues to develop and continues getting better. But at the same time, I believe that, no, I don't believe that. I know that for a fact. We all know that human communication is incredibly complex. There is the points about context, and there's the points about not just context, interaction context, cultural context, emotional context, tonal context, and all other complexities of communication that AI may not be able and may never be able to pick up. Because even the language, let's say I have one child right now in high school, and I'm having her to explain to me what she's trying to say, because the lingo and the slang changed for high schoolers for when my other kids were in high school, and they're just about, the oldest one is 10 years older. So, and I'm already having difficulty understanding. So any type of critical conversation where I want to be understood clearly, I want to have a human being interpreting that for me, a professional interpreter who understands the nuances, the information, and all the intricacies of the conversation. It's kind of like turning the tables. Who do you want representing you in court? I don't know, if you are renewing your driver's license and you're verifying your address, maybe AI would be, okay, because you can read it. But if you are facing a death penalty or in a very serious litigation, would you like an AI attorney representing you in court? Comprehending all of the details. Same in the medical center. If I'm trying to find out which way to the nursing station, or where do I pick out a form to fill out? Or if, let's say, if we're measuring blood pressure and they're saying, put the sleeve here, I'm okay, my life is not at risk. But if it's anything serious, I want a professional interpreter. One thing I want to point out is that risk is very individual. So if I am...
And subjective.
And subjective. So let's say if I don't have food allergies, I can use AI at a restaurant to look at a menu. But there was a recent case in the UK where somebody who is very allergic ended up having an interaction where ingredients were translated using, I believe, Google Translate or one of those automated tools. They were translated incorrectly. A child ended up eating something that they were very highly allergic to and died. So that led to a death outcome. So if I am highly allergic, I really want an expert to look at this. So risk is very individual, sometimes even in very, very trivial situations. And I think the decision of that risk goes back to Bill's famous end users, who are not really end users, who are very active participants of that information and of that content.
So, Mila, based on that example that you've just given us, let's talk about what's actually happening in the field. AI is no longer theoretical, and when we had Sean on the program, he observed that it's being used in courts and hospitals and call centers. And you have alluded to these, and both of you have mentioned, the issue of liability and responsibility. But let's talk about oversight, accuracy, validation, and where all of this intersects with, ethics. Maybe Bill, you could pick up on that, and Mila,
I
you
will
can
start on the
answer.
first part, and the second part I'll defer to Bill. So I think what's happening in the field is a Wild West. You have end clients all the way from going, we don't want to touch anything AI, to going, okay, we're going to replace everything with AI. So the first part that the end clients are not really considering is the true cost of AI, because you have to consider the cost of devices, the cost of implementation, the cost of review. There is a cost to AI that also comes in either per user or per minute or per hour. And so there is an additional to that. There is also a fee that goes on with AI. And then, of course, the risk management, the system upgrades, and many points on what are the costs that are affecting AI. Secondly, what is happening is when we see, and actually some of those end users end up waking up and going, oh my God, AI solution we implemented, it ended up costing us more than human interpreters in the end. And we kind of stopped it there. Additionally, what's a lot of end users and clients don't know is the difference between what is accurate and what's not accurate. And so they're implementing AI solution for a language that may not even have a developed language pair, but there we go, here it is, and this is an AI platform that offers everything. Another thing that we're seeing is now there's an emergence of tech vendors that have never been in the language industry that are coming in and making claims that my solution delivers, there we go, everything, and including all languages, which, by the way, there's 7,000 languages. Some of them don't even have even basic keyboards and alphabets, right? So and then launching that to clients who are not well educated in the industry and don't understand what risk they're taking. And I see that Bill is wanting to jump in. So Bill, let you jump in, and I may add something to this.
So there are a lot of different threads here, and I'm going to just start in. Don't take the order that I present these in as to how important they are. Part of the ostensible attractiveness of AI is the affordances it offers. So, a state administrative office of the courts might be able to conceive of getting the Rohingya or Karen interpreter out to a remote location. Well, okay, that's very expensive. That's going to delay the court case potentially. If there's an AI solution that just plugs in, we don't have to encumber any delays, etc. So that's a very typical use case where the potential buyers of AI interpreting are like, okay, languages of lesser diffusion, rural or remote locations, hours that are outside the normal 9 to 5 business hours, especially for, say, law enforcement or for medical systems. And you have to say, well, we'll slow down. You can have language like Karen. The language of Burma has no written form. AI is going to perform very poorly because AI requires data. And if there are no data, if the data aren't in digital form, it's not going to perform particularly well. that, and I've talked to a lot of state administrative offices of the courts. I've talked to a lot of state Supreme Courts over the last year, where I've pointed out to state Supreme Court justices, you guys, continue cases for all sorts of reasons. And yet the one thing that is unacceptable is somehow continuing it because you couldn't find an interpreter to start the case on Monday instead of Tuesday. Right. And like, okay, really? So there's sort of a practical real world intersection there that for some reason, all of these other delays to court cases are more or less countenanced, but and what it really comes down to is our colleagues who are responsible for language access in state administrative offices of the courts are really not empowered to say no to judges, right? So they're kind of on the short end of the stick, as we say in English. All right, so you've got these potential affordances, but you really have to start unpacking them, because where does AI work best? AI or machine translation, and remembering that AI is really an outgrowth of machine translation, and at its core is still, frankly, machine translation. Speech to text, text to text, text to speech, right? It works best in language pairs that have a really high density of data, and the languages that are the hardest to staff and the hardest to provide in state and federal courts, in medical facilities, are the ones that are going to be the ones where AI doesn't work particularly well. And recalling that there are something like 1,000 languages spoken in the U.S., right? An enormous number of languages. Sure, Spanish is 60% of that, but then you've got this long tail that adds up to rather a lot of people and rather a lot of languages. And as Mila said, at the state and local level, we're kind of all over the map in terms of experimentation. So on one extreme, the state of Ohio, the state courts there have proposed a rule that does not allow AI interpreting for any purpose in the state court system, and allows AI for translation only for documents that are not considered legal documents, that don't end up on the docket of the court, right? That's one extreme. And there are other extremes where I'm not going to name the states because, we're trying hard here, where there may be states that don't have a unified state court system, where the local and municipal courts have a certain degree of autonomy. And they're saying, why can't we use AI? Other than, why do we have to pay to get even a Spanish interpreter, put them up for a week, 200 miles from home, etc. Okay, so that kind of experimentation is going to continue. The point that I've made consistently over the last 18 months is, well, you have to understand the risks, and you have to accept those risks. And the risk may be that there's misinterpretation, which humans also do. Risk may be there's a hallucination, that there's material inserted into the court record which was not present. Humans generally tend not to do that. If my experience with human interpreters in court and other situations is they tend to leave out things that should be in the record. They tend to condense what the witness was saying as opposed to inserting new material.
Bill, and I wanted to add there that the incidents of hallucination recently happened or came to light even with English to English in the case of transcription used in medical settings.
Yes.
So it's not even, they don't just say, oh, it's bad translation. It happens even to English. So back to your point.
And in the medical setting, the medical setting is interesting because, and illustrative and informative, because in the medical setting, the medical doctor who signs off on the after, the after encounter notes, you go in for your regular checkup every year, you go in for a sick visit, you go in for a surgical consult, you are discharged. The medical doctor puts her name and her signature on those notes, and is liable if something goes wrong. So they have a very different, the liability is a little different than, say, a judge who might be overturned on appeal, right? A prosecutor who might lose a case, or a defense lawyer who might lose a case. But in the medical profession, what we're seeing, both from the way that the Joint Commission is conceptualizing AI in all sorts of areas in medicine, and the way that the Joint Commission requires linguistic and culturally appropriate care and requires language access, is that, hey, Dr. Golovina, you signed off on this. You encumber the risk. And that makes doctors somewhat more conservative, even if there's this promise that, a ambient note taking with translation is going to be a time savings for doctors. And so what we're seeing is, we're seeing experimentation. There's experimentation in, for example, in community interpreting in the municipal governments. You check in at the MVA or the DMV. We call it the MVA in Maryland because we're special, but the DMV. And you need to figure out which of the 14 lines you get into to do whatever you need to do. You need new tags, you need a new driver's license, whatever it is, okay, is that an AI avatar? Maybe it is. And is it probably going to get you in the right line? Probably is. And maybe even when you get to the front of the line and you're sitting and taking doing the vision test and turning in your forms to get your license renewed, that can be very high stakes if you need that driver's license for your job or your livelihood, on the one hand. On the other hand, is it a particularly complicated communication? No, not particularly. Very routinized, Okay, so that might be, and I'm just saying that as a hypothetical for the use of AI. And one of the other things that we've come up with very recently in Safe AI in the last week, we talk about use cases. We have these big buckets. Okay, here's educational interpreting. Here's legal and judicial interpreting. Here's healthcare. Here's community. But within those, there are lots of very specific situations where, where you could go from a straight up.
For example, Bill, forgive me for interrupting, but there's a huge difference between interpreting an open court proceeding and interpreting in a mediation. There's a huge difference between interpreting in a motion where you're interpreting for a defendant who is listening versus what is required to interpret in a trial for a consecutive interpreter, or how you need to communicate in the end goal of a client attorney meeting versus the end goal of a plea setting in a court, in open court. So absolutely, there, the fact that it seems that everything is just getting put together in one bucket and let them sort it out is problematic.
But I think we, on the human side, on the side of the profession and the industry, tend to use these buckets as a shorthand, right? To say, okay, there's a whole bunch of things in one, or this bucket versus, but the various buckets are just lots of different things in all these buckets. Whereas the smarter vendors of speech-to-speech AI solutions are actually looking at the very specific situations and saying, hey, we think our solution is good for this, but not for that in the court interpreting setting or the healthcare interpreting setting. And taking all of those vendors at their words, if they're really making that kind of differentiation, that's great. Now, what's happening on the other side of the table is the second question, and is the AOC in the state courts, or is the language access office in that regional healthcare system really adhering to what their vendor is telling them. These are the situations you should use it for, the use cases you should use it for. Oh, but it works pretty good over here, so let's try it over here. Because all those, we all know interpreters are really hard to deal with. They just are.
Well, not all interpreters, Bill. Not all interpreters, not always, but
I was,
Well, I'd probably say more than interpreters are hard to deal with, and I suspect that you weren't that hard to deal with, Bill. But I think it is cumbersome to deal with an interpreter, and it is time consuming. And I think that gives interpreters perhaps it gives people an impression that interpreters are hard to deal with.
Well, they're humans and they're professionals, and you got to schedule them. You got to feed them. You got to pay them, and sometimes they're not available.
You have to wait for them to finish speaking before you can ask your next question, and you have to let them interpret what they just heard, which is something that a lot of people just don't feel. They don't. Either they don't understand the value of it, or they don't have the time in order to make that process work properly.
And I want to add to this point, which is kind of critical. So we talk about, okay, maybe AI is better when there's no human interpreter. And let's say it's an emergency situation. And let's say it's I'm calling a hotline, or something bad is happening to me. And it was another recent case when it was the situation, somebody called a hotline asking for help. And on the other end was AI that was used to interpret, because a human interpreter was not available. And guess what? AI cancels background noise.
It was a 911 call center.
Yeah.
And it was a domestic violence case. Domestic violence was going on in the background, but the AI cancels that out, and the police show up not knowing. Right? Okay. Not helpful. I mean, the point about humans is, versus the AI is, and what I've said more than once now, when I've given these, been asked to testify, right, and asked to provide information to different state Supreme Courts or different state AOCs, would you replace the court reporters with AI? Because some places they got a union. Would you replace the counsel with AI? AI is just mining vast textual databases and making predictions. Couldn't they do the work of the lawyers? Would you replace yourself, Mr. Justice, with AI? And why is it that the interpreters can be replaced with AI, but no other component of the system is subject to that?
Have you received a satisfactory answer?
I've gotten some dirty looks, so yeah. Yeah. I mean, and the point being that, again, there's this assumption that we're just slot A into tab B, that we're just transferring literal meaning from one language into the other, right? And that's somehow because so many of the people that we engage with who are in the court setting, in the hospital setting, are monolingual. They don't have any conception of what it is to be multilingual and multicultural, right? The assumption that there's an equivalent, a literal equivalent of meaning from one language to another, which is a facile assumption for anybody who, can read literature in their own language, right? But we still get tagged with that. And that's why I think in some ways we're susceptible to, AI can just replace this particular human function. But if you go back to, I'm going to go do a deep dive here, Roman Jakobson's text on linguistic meaning in 1958, where you have the code, you have speaker, you have two interlocutors, and there's a linguistic code, but there are 5 other elements of that communication There's the context, there's the pragmatics, there's the sociolinguistics, there's the shared knowledge, right? AI really doesn't address any of those, you know. Setting aside, you know, like my favorite words in Spanish are chingolero and rufero and briquero, metalero, you know. Buscamos briqueros. That's what all of the, you know, I drive around the DC area, and
You missed forkliftero.
forlifero, yeah, you know. I don't even remember the actual Spanish word for a brick mason, because the word everywhere that I go is briquero, right? Setting all that aside, like languages change and everything else, there's all of this other context that AI has actually proven not so good at, you know, not so good at it. And I'm not anti-technology. There are uses of AI. I want to be really clear. And there are use cases that didn't exist before, like AI captioning. You can go on Google now and you can get stuff captioned in your language from other languages. Now, Google will say, use at your own risk, right? But it's material that was never going to be, no one was ever going to pay to take that, you know, Japanese cooking channel with 3,000 subscribers and dub it into English or caption it into English. Now you can do that. Great. No, you don't need to add a kilogram of water to your pot when you're making your noodles, but okay, right? There are use cases. I don't mean to actually make light of it, because this is what happened with machine translation 25 years ago. There are use cases that didn't exist. There are materials, there's content that was not accessible and was never going to be accessible. And now the technology makes it accessible. All the way to, there are places where you have to have a human and only a human. And that may be in the courtroom, that may be in the oncology consult, right? That may be in the individualized education plan meeting, where a human and only a human is acceptable. And there's a lot of space in between, and that's kind of what we're figuring out.
So, Mila, jump in as a president of an LSP and in all of your different many roles. You know, I'm imagining that, you know, you're trying to sort out what the role of AI should and should not be in you know, the work that you do every day.
Well, we actually took a very proactive approach towards AI. Everybody at the company is highly encouraged to try to see where we can use AI. So captioning of information and trainings, we're looking at that. That definitely helped it. But the other day we tried to use it in marketing, and we ended up creating a very embarrassing video that we actually posted and then had to take down. We were trying to say Happy Interpreter Day with ASL, and you know, apparently we didn't say that. We said something else, so the video had to come down, and we didn't check internally properly. You know, looked good, you know, but
Hence human oversight, right?
right, and so
and you have ASL interpreters that work for you.
Right, but it was, you know, one of the marketing team thought they were doing a great job. It looked good, and it looked great, and we didn't realize. So but low cost, right? A lot of laughs from the ASL community that saw it. Some questions as to what what we're doing, but nobody died in the end. So AI does have its use cases. AI is very important. It's going to change about how we work and what we do. But AI also doesn't catch human emotion. Like AI doesn't catch sarcasm necessarily in the same way. And we've tried using AI in certain places, and then by the time, or I have tried using AI for prompts for writing, and by the time I'm done writing all the prompts to make sure it comes out correctly, I would have written the text way before, right? But sometimes that first draft, thank you for giving me the first draft. It's really helpful. And for those that have writer's block, that first draft, even if it's all wrong, it helps. So I actually encourage people to use AI daily for non-confidential materials for that.
They need to pay attention. So I get emails all the time that say, "Dear William, Millie, we've known each other for 20 years. What's my name?"
Bill.
Bill, right? Yeah, given name's William. There's nobody now that uses that because my folks are gone and they can't yell at me when they're mad at me anymore. Or if I were in court or in some very, like seriously, I don't use that name, right? I get an email that says, "Dear William," or "Hi, William." Even worse,
They're trying to sell you something,
or they're people whom I've actually reached out to, and I'm just sort of like, come on, read my sig block. It says Bill. My signature says, "Thanks, Bill," and then 2 lines down, "Dr. Bill Rivers." Like, just take 30 seconds. Don't rely on the AI. And okay, maybe that is a generational thing where people are, just using the AI to compose their, the predictive text, right? Predictive typing, which is, it's not really AI because it's been around for 10 years, but it actually kind of bugs me, nobody calls me Bill, and nobody calls me William. Everybody calls me Bill. They call me a lot of other things too. William is not one of them.
But I would really encourage people to take it and see how, even when you get really good at prompt writing, what are the nuanced challenges that come in? Sometimes incomplete information. Sometimes if you don't know about a subject, it may look good to you, but if you show it to a subject matter expert, it doesn't. It doesn't look good at all. And so we as linguists, as subject matter experts in our fields, will see this immediately. So I encourage people to use it. It does have its place. It has its great place. It has a lot of use cases, and it will be improving, and it will be improving fast paced. But one of the things that I think what it will do is it will take translation, it will actually improve the quality of our work. I remember early on in my career, many, many years ago, pre-translation memory, I think I started when I was 1, translating packing lists for international shipments, where you had to do the same abbreviation over and over and over and over and over and over and over. At the time, over time, it was just the most unsatisfying job. So do I want to be doing that? No. Do I want to translate it once and and translation memory to carry it over? Yes. And then check over this. So I think the same thing will happen with AI and interpreting. Do I really want to be directing people between lines at the driver's license station? Probably not. And would I appreciate a nice host at the airport or in the lobby of a bank building that tells me reception is on floor 10 in my language if I need to know? Absolutely, especially if I'm in a country like Japan, if everything is in Japanese and I don't understand it. I would really appreciate that reception at person, whatever, robot in the lobby. Mm-hmm. So, and is it a satisfying job for an interpreter? Absolutely not. But
well, and no one's going to pay for it.
Right. And so one of the things I actually want to bring Japan back in, we have this perception that Japan is everything super automated. And I took my first trip to Japan last year, and I was absolutely fascinated. I have never had more human interaction than I had in Japan. Because here, at least in the US, you go to the way they automate it, for example, checkout process is they put the machines where you have to stand and scan each item one by one, spending a lot of time. And there's the automation, and not all items scan well. Well, whereas in Japan, what I saw is you put everything in a basket, you come in, and the machine already, the moment the basket reached the machine, scanned every single item accurately, your receipt printed out, and you can very quickly pay with your phone with one touch, 30 seconds. But there is a very friendly human assistant who is making sure that you have everything to your liking, you found everything correctly, and everything that you need is there for you. And so that makes customer service exceptional. Whereas we kind of got it backwards here. Your aisles are empty. Nobody's in the aisle at the store to help you. They've reduced the headcount to cut costs. And then you have this, whatever it is, self-serving,
Self-checkout. Yep,
self-checkout, which is
self-checkout.
awful. So I think if we actually learn from Japan on how to do automation right and apply it to the profession, AI is going to improve the quality of our work. But I think that will require, and you were asking a question about action, that requires a lot of first self-education. We need to really use the tools so we can speak one way or the other. And then once we're self-educated and we understand what the limitations are, client education. Because in the effort of cost cutting, we end up with no human in the aisle, and then the self-checkout experience, which I believe many people can relate to.
And Bill, is someone who's worked at the national level on language policy, what role can interpreters actually play in shaping system level decisions about AI? I believe that one of the guidances was about having interpreters be involved in the development of the use of AI for our industry.
So the first thing I say whenever I'm asked this question for whatever the context is, make sure you're part of your local and national professional associations so that you're getting informed, that you're part of a network, and that you can take action when that comes through that network. And we met years ago in Atlanta at the Atlanta Area Translator Interpreters Association. Perfectly good example. Like, you got to be involved. You've got to make yourself informed. Don't shy away from being informed. Don't, as much as I might sound like I'm anti-technology, I'm not. I'm a former engineer. I've written thousands of lines of code a long time ago, but I totally, I would say totally understand, but I have had a foot in that world. But my professional career for the last 35 years has been very much in the human space, and very much, so make sure that you are, as I said, involved and informed, and then doing the best you can in your day-to-day. Follow Safe AI, follow what the ATA is putting out, follow what NAGIT's putting out, follow what NCIHC is putting out. Those memberships, if you're a sole proprietor, those memberships are tax deductible, but they are incredibly important. And there are too many workaday interpreters, workaday translators who are not part of a broader community. And when you're not part of a broader community, it's easier to be picked off. It's easier for a state AOC to say, hey, we're going to screw around with your rates or your hours, or we're just going to replace you with technology in certain situations. And if you're not informed, you're not going to be able to make the case otherwise. So those are the points I would make for people to follow up on.
And I would add, this is an opportunity for self-improvement. This is an opportunity for specialization. Maria, you spoke so eloquently, understanding what happens in courts. That takes a lot of knowledge. I can speak eloquently about, let's say, a trauma encounter, but this is where specialization will actually bring more value to our work. And I have a counterintuitive prediction. I believe that AI will help us increase how much we charge, because by becoming better experts, we are now eliminating those, self-checkout, quote unquote, I'm comparing them, encounters. And we're now being the specialty person who understands staying with, let's say, the grocery store example, the master chef, who can tell you, who has a lot of expertise. So I think my prediction is that for professional interpreters, through AI will actually end up driving the rate up. But as an individual, that requires extra knowledge, extra specialization, and extra expertise.
Mila, well, we are touching a little bit upon your area of expertise. I'd really like to hear your insights on the ethical and trauma-informed integration of AI, especially in contexts like healthcare, social services. You clearly, you mentioned a few minutes ago how AI is incapable of understanding and processing sarcasm, as Holly said that it's impossible of processing humans' emotions. I believe you said that as well. So what should organizations consider before adopting these tools within such important contexts and such high-stake contents?
Well, right now we have a lot of different, quote unquote, epidemics happening, but one of them, besides spending too much time in front of digital devices, one of them is an incredible rise in human trafficking. And the numbers increased from $150 billion to $346 billion, according to NASDAQ, and 36.2 million cases reported to the national hotline. And one of the important things that is important to remember is that a lot of our communication is nonverbal. I may be saying yes to you because somebody, my abuser, my trafficker, is standing next to me, but my nonverbal cues really mean a no. But my verbal outcome may be meaning yes. And so that critical component that brings us back to the well-being of the person who you're communicating with. Additional pieces, there are some therapies, and we actually had a class on that with the Synergetic Play Therapy Institute founder for our interpreters. Some therapy may be where a child, for example, went completely nonverbal due to trauma. And you're helping that child integrate trauma, but they're more comfortable hearing or they're understanding it in their own language. And so when an interpreter actually becomes part of the external regulators that are happening in the trauma-informed setting, while AI cannot become part of an external regulator. But at the same time, for some very small communities, small linguistic communities. I like to bring forward my Bulgarian friends in Houston. At one point, the Bulgarian community was so small here that just a few families that, if we would get a request for an interpreter from a hospital, I'd have to call a family member, who do we want to make sure to send that privacy is kept confidential? Which one of your friends would go? Sounds like grandma's in the hospital again. So, in that type of situation, it may be better, to use a remote interpreter that will pick up, or maybe for questions, do you need help? Are you in trouble? So another important thing to consider when somebody is under stress or have been subjected to a lot of abuse, their memory may be affected. And interpreters can help kind of reconstruct and be part of that. And I'll give you actually an example that would be illustrative of that. There was a case where a woman was raped, and while she was being raped, she wanted to remember the name of her abuser so that she can give that sketch recognition to describe what happened. And she did, and they almost picked up the person. And they almost let him go, except the tests, the DNA test confirmed accuracy. And the detail she forgot is that the person had half of his face covered by tattoo. And that seems like a very normal detail. Like if you're forgetting that, you're obviously lying. But apparently, when we're highly under stress, there is that core memory and peripheral memory that get confused. And a person may confuse a lot of other things. So interpreter can help be part of the care team to be able to accurately reconstruct and help actually the providers in that situation. So those are just a few examples, but there's many more.
So let's talk a little bit now about the everyday types of situations an interpreter might encounter with the AI. For the interpreters who are listening, obviously we'll be sharing the link to the Safe AI guidance, and I imagine that, the first thing you'd probably say is, use that as a conversation starter with your agency, your supervisor, share the information. But what about if we have an informed interpreter and that person starts noticing that AI is being used or implemented without human oversight? How do you recommend that this be approached? Because otherwise it probably feels like, Chicken Little, the sky's falling, and people might react adversely if they don't really understand why the interpreter is, raising the red flag.
So at present, we have to get really specific, and in the present moment, really specific about where is this happening. If it's happening in healthcare, the interpreter should point them to 45 CFR 92.201.C.3. And that is the federal regulation that implements Section 1557 of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. The overall regulation is 45 CFR 92, which is volume 45 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 92. The very specific section is Section 201.C.3. And that says that if machine translation is used for anything that's remotely important or complicated, must be reviewed by a qualified human translator. The way that the federal government to date, including all of what's happened in the last 3 months, the way that the federal government to date has interpreted that is, if you're in a healthcare setting and this is something that impacts the treatment, the outcomes, the costs, the rights, or it's complex or nuanced, it has to be either rendered by a human if it's spoken, or reviewed by a human if it's written. Understanding that might be honored in the breach more often than not. It's really important for healthcare interpreters to say, hey, wait a minute, this is AI, and oh, by the way, here's this nonpartisan neutral organization with 600 worldwide volunteers from 15 different sectors, right, called Safe AI, that published this guidance that says you have to give the people involved in the communication the autonomy to decide whether they're going to accept that. You have to be transparent. That's number one, autonomy. Number three, transparent about what you're doing. So I've got Kaiser here in the Mid-Atlantic. Really like Kaiser. Data architecture is great. The data analysis is great. Last time I went in, my primary care physician said, hey, do you mind if I use the ambient AI note taker? I said, sure. Now, I've known her for 15 years. And I said, sure. After it was done, I asked, and how does this compare? And she's like, you understand it's a template. Yeah, I understand it's a template. Like there's a template of things she would be pulling in to the after action report or whatever it's called. Whatever Kaiser calls it after my encounter with the healthcare provider, things we talked about, things I'm supposed to do, right? That was highly templatized pre-AI. And she said, no, I have to go through and review everything that the AI says and report it. It's more work for me. Because again, as a physician, she's on the hook. Something goes wrong, she's the first one who gets sued, right? And then Kaiser gets sued, et cetera. Not that, and that's fine. It was a routine checkup, right? But there's that element where, okay, what is the real affordance here? And how does it balance with the other factors that are specific to that situation? Does that judge really want to risk an error, a fatal error being introduced into her case because AI missed something, right? Or does that judge want to be subject to further appellate litigation? Because, in almost all the courts in the US, the as you well know, Maria, the court record is what the interpreter voices, right? That's a human interpreter. I don't think we've had a test of what if it's a computerized interpreter, right? Does that judge want to be the test case for that in the federal district in Puerto Rico or in, the circuit court in Montgomery County, Maryland? Probably not. Yeah, certainly not. So that there are lots of ways of saying, okay, well, let's think this through. Let's find the places where it makes sense. If you're going into the courthouse and you need to, I don't know, file a deed or apply for a marriage license or pay a fine, maybe that's a low stakes interaction where, again, you always have that one should always have the opportunity to hit the button and get a human. But if you're in the dock, if you're sitting at the defendant's table, I certainly wouldn't want an AI interpreter, and that's nothing against technology, and recognizing that humans also make mistakes, but there's a type of accountability that we have as interpreters. We have a moral and ethical code, right? The AI doesn't have any ethics or morality, and that's sort of like the gut level reaction that I have, that if I screw up, it's on me, and that's my fault, and I am responsible, right? I may be, again, going far afield, and I keep saying I'm not anti-technology, but I want the technology to be used appropriately.
Mila, what is your take on all of this right now?
I think we're in the middle of a transformative change. And in the middle of a transformative change, there's always both, some good and some bad. Everything has, that's why in Asian culture, we have the yin and yang, right? You have some good and you have some bad. And I think we at a place where, well, number one, a lot of education is required for both us personally and for the client side, and a lot of regulation is required to pass on what is safe and what is not safe. When cars first came about, there were no traffic lights. We need to put those traffic lights for AI. And I think if in the end, I hope that things kind of settle down and AI takes more jobs that we don't really want to do, like in the past, the packing lists, and actually a human profession for an interpreter is even further elevated. That's my vision of the future, and I'm going to stick by it. But it's a time of change, and it's very important to be active, to be involved, to be educated, and stay on top of things.
So, Bill, from your perspective, what is next for Safe AI, for the Safe AI Task Force?
So we are just about to publish a contracting toolkit. So if you're acquiring language services, how do you assess AI within those language services? That's probably, I say just about, it's probably 2 months away. And we're contemplating 2 new projects. One is, what are the real costs of AI? Is it really cheaper? Because there are a lot of hidden costs. You have to have devices and connectivity and training and everything else. And Mila has done a lot of work on this. And then second is the I don't know, the long-term goal, the golden mean, as it were, of what's the relative quality for humans versus highly well qualified humans versus good AI in various specific situations. That's a longer term project, and something that may take us a couple of years. But those are where I think we are right now.
And to kind of bring this back to my traffic light comparisons, we're in the streets where there's both horses and cars and pedestrians, and Safe AI is working to make sure we put in pedestrian crossroads and traffic lights and crossroads, and make sure that there is regulation in place so everything is done responsibly and
Yeah.
technology is integrated responsibly.
So for people who are listening to this program and would like to get more involved, what kind of opportunities are available through the Safe AI Task Force?
We're always looking for volunteers. You can send us an email through the form on the website. We will have upcoming work on the research committee, on the guidance committee, as we take our guidance and try to rewrite it in language that's a little more accessible in English. I mean, it's written by a committee and they did a great job, but it's been out there for a year. We need to rewrite it. We've got work on the PR committee. So there are lots of places where people can plug in and do useful work.
And Mila, as the head of an LSP, what is it that you would like to know interpreters or translators who work with your agency or with any other agencies about this subject?
Well, I don't think it's agency specific. I think it's actually for all of us as professionals. I will again encourage people highly to be very educated in it, and the only way to be educated on it is to use it daily, and asking questions, looking for that recipe, or whatever it is that you do that you without breaking confidentiality, where you can use AI so you can understand the pros and cons of different products.
That's a really, really good suggestion. I think that sometimes those of us who might fear something, we fear it because we don't know it rather than because it really does, certain aspects of it pose a risk to us. So we can certainly then gauge whether it is it is something that is going to be harmful to us, or it is going to be have a negative impact. But the only way to do that is to know it, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, if we look back 25 years ago when Language Weaver dropped, I was at the American Translators Association. The sky was falling. And Yost Zechi got up on stage at one of the plenaries and said, translators are not going to be replaced by technology. They'll be replaced by translators who learn how to use technology. And I think that's exactly where we are. And in the 25 years since statistical machine translation really became viable, and all of the different things that rolled out since then, Google and DeepL and NeuralMT and all that stuff, we need more translators than we ever needed. There's more text out there that's being translated than ever before. And it's being done very differently than it was in 1988 when I started, when this was the engine, right? Okay. And I think the same things are going to happen, analogous, not the same exact things, but analogous things will happen in interpreting. The work that we do now as interpreters will look very different a generation from now. We will still need human interpreters, and we will still need their judgment and their compassion and their intelligence, but we will need it in different ways than we do today.
Well, Safe AI is definitely paced to assist interpreters and translators in finding their place in those upcoming years. So, Bill, Mila, thank you so much for your leadership and your insights. It's really been a pleasure having you here on Subject to Interpretation.
Well, thank you, Maria.
Thank you for having us.
To our listeners, please download the Safe AI guidance, start the conversation in your community, and most importantly, speak up. The future of interpreting depends on our willingness to adapt while protecting the core values of accuracy and confidentiality. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop learning.